The 4 real facts about the Napoleon's Wars. Napoleon Bonaparte was a French military and political leader who rose to prominence during the French Revolution and led several successful campaigns during the French Revolutionary Wars. Napoleon is often considered to be one of the greatest military commanders in history. He is known for his intellectual brilliance as well as for his ambition, which has been seen as a driving force behind many of the great events that have shaped European history. Fact 1. The French Empire had the largest army in Europe at one point in history. This was a result of their extensive colonial empire. The French army was made up of over 400,000 soldiers and officers, who were stationed all over the world. They were the most powerful military force in Europe for nearly 150 years. The French army was also the largest army in Europe for many years, until World War I. The French army was made up of conscripts from every region. Conscription is when the government requires individuals to serve in the military. In France, it was mandatory for all men and all women to serve in the French military. This means, any man or woman who did not want to be a part of the military had no choice about if they wanted to serve. The French army was made up of every region in France, and thus this gave them great manpower. Fact 2. Russia has a huge military of its own that defeated Napoleon and his French imperial army. It was one of the most important victories in Russian history. This is a topic that discusses the victory of Russia over France in the Napoleonic Wars. The victory occurred at the Battle of Borodino, which took place on September 7, 1812. The battle led to a decisive defeat for Napoleon's army, forcing them to withdraw from Russia. Russia then allowed the British and Prussians to use its territory as a base from which they invaded France. After conquering Russia, Napoleon realized that he needed to leave the country in order to preserve his army. He ordered his troops to retreat, with the hope of fighting another day. This led to Russia defeating France and forcing Napoleon's army into exile in 1814 at the Battle of Berezina. After this battle, most of Europe was ruled by Russian armies and Austria-Hungary, and Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815 marked the end of his rule. The war also deeply divided France, permanently weakening the French monarchy. Fact 3. The Battle of Waterloo wasn't the only battle Napoleon lost. Napoleon was a brilliant military strategist and was a very successful leader. He changed the face of Europe and its colonies with his leadership. But he never won at Waterloo, which is why he is often called the emperor who never won a final battle. Here are some other battles that Napoleon lost. 1. The Battle of Aspern-Essling, 1809. Napoleon had to retreat from this battle because his forces were outnumbered by the Austrian army. 2. Battle of Borodino, 1812. This battle left both sides severely depleted in men, supplies, and ammunition. The Russians withdrew from the battlefield and Napoleon's forces were too weak to pursue them. 3. Battle of Dresden, 1813. This battle resulted in another defeat for Napoleon as Prussian troops. Under General Blücher caught up with him while his troops were retreating after defeating the Russians at Leipzig. The Battle of Borodino was a Napoleonic victory and part of the War of the Fourth Coalition. Fact 4. The Napoleonic War gave the Russians access to fine wines and luxury items. Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812 was a disaster for the French. They were caught off guard by the harsh Russian winter and had to retreat across the frozen tundra. The French had been one of their main suppliers of wine, so Napoleon's troops were very popular among wealthy Russians before they invaded France in 1814. After the Napoleonic War, Russia became an industrialized country. It grew rich off of its natural resources and exports, and began to have access to fine wines and luxury items like France did before it was invaded in 1814. The French had been one of their main suppliers of wine, so Napoleon's troops were very popular among wealthy Russians before they invaded France in 1814. Russia rose in the ranks before the Napoleonic War, and by 1814, it had become one of France's main suppliers. It was so important to France that in 1810, Napoleon I signed a treaty with Tsar Alexander I of Russia for exclusive trade rights for Russia's wines and spirits. The 4 myths of Napoleon Bonaparte's Wars. Napoleon Bonaparte was a military and political leader of France. He was a general during the French Revolution and its wars. His use of large, well-trained armies and modern tactics led to many victories. The myths of Napoleon's wars are not based on facts, but rather on the propaganda that he used to make his soldiers believe in him as their leader. Myth number 1: Napoleon was a tyrant and dictator. He was the Emperor of France from 1804 to 1814. He was also the Emperor of France in 1815 and again in 1852, after his return from exile on Elba. Napoleon is considered one of the most influential figures in history, and his legacy has been felt across the globe for over 2 centuries now. The island became a province of France in 1815, when it was ceded for Napoleon's lifetime to reign as its governor. It is located in the Tyrrhenian Sea, to the south of Corsica and north of Capraia. In 1815, Napoleon was sent to the island after being defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. The island was used as a penal colony. Napoleon's nephew, Eugène de Beauharnais, Napoleon III, was also sent here. It is part of Tuscany, Italy. Myth number 2: Napoleon was overthrown by the people of France in a revolution. The French Revolution is one of the most important events in human history. It was a period of radical change that had an enormous impact on France and its people. The revolution saw the end to centuries of monarchy and feudalism, and ushered in new ideas about democracy, liberty, equality, and individual rights. The French Revolution began with a revolt led by peasants who were angry about their treatment by the nobility. The peasants wanted to abolish feudalism and have their own land to farm on instead of being forced to rent land from rich landlords. They also wanted an end to serfdom, a system where they were tied to the land owned by nobles, which prevented them from moving around freely or taking up different jobs as they pleased. As time went on, more people joined the revolution, mostly middle-class citizens who had lost out during King Louis XIV's reign, 1643 to 1715. The Dukes of Brittany rose up in opposition to King Louis XIV, who wanted to impose his absolute rule on all of France. The Dukes sought an alliance with England and the Emperor of Austria, not to be confused with the country of Austria. While they were fighting the French army, their people joined the peasants in rebellion, who fought against noble privileges and serfdom. Stay tuned for part 2 of the Napoleon's Wars: Facts, Myths, and Misconceptions, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, please. Thank you.